we can't place the burden of our health entirely on the shoulders of our doctors. It's simply not fair. We patients must take an active role. And my hope is that by working hand in hand with our doctors, we will be able to achieve optimum health.
Leslie Kenny, welcome to the Better Podcast. I'm so happy to welcome you.
And I am so honored and privileged to be here. It's going to be so much fun to hang out with you.
Yeah, we're going to have a great time. And this is take two, as we were just talking about. The last time we were actually trying to have this conversation was late last year. And in the middle of our conversation, just my street. So this was how weird this was. Just my street. Total black. There was a couple of my street and then there was another one. Total blackout. Like my computer has no recollection of our conversation. And I was texting you or emailing you from my phone. I'm like, you just blackout. I don't know what just happened. So hopefully the gods and goddesses are in our favor today so we can have a great conversation of Primeadine and Spermidine as well.
Wonderful.
All right. So before we jump in, because this is a product, I haven't been this excited about a compound. I think, maybe magnesium, compares or creatine maybe in terms of mitochondrial health. But we're going to talk a lot about Spermidine, which I always get a lot of questions about. And before we dive in, though, I think that your story is fascinating because you didn't necessarily start out in the health space. And I think like so many, women and men, but when you're given a diagnosis that's like, sorry guys, we don't know what to do from here, then you're like, okay, I got to find a solution for it. So I would love for you to walk us through sort of the origin story, if you will, of, where you were, how you sort of found your way to studying at Oxford around Spermidine. So I'd love for you to explain that to our listeners.
Absolutely. Well, I think like a lot of women of my generation, I'll be 57 in a couple of months. I was brought up thinking that I could do everything, right? The career, the children, the house, just like Martha Stewart said it should be, right? And I didn't understand that I was setting myself up for failure. So I put a lot of pressure on myself to be all those things to all people. And I was doing that in Hong Kong, where I had an online matchmaking company. And it was around 2000, I went through the boom and the bust of, the dot-com bubble. And my health began to deteriorate quite a lot. And when I went to my doctor, this was in 2004, I was 39. I was undergoing a lot of fertility treatments. I think I was on my 5th IVF round. I was doing donor eggs. I had the acupuncturist there, as the eggs were put into me and getting everything right. So I was seeing a lot of doctors, but I noticed pain in my hands and I couldn't use scissors very well. And I was having trouble on my keyboard. So I went to the doctor and just said, I think it's probably just some age-related arthritis or something. I'm not sure what it is. Can you just check this out? And that's when I got that call that nobody wants, where it's not the receptionist that calls to say, they're fine, your test results are fine. But it is actually the doctor who calls you and says, your results are back, and I'd like you to come into the office so we can discuss them, which we know that never bodes well. So I went into the office, and bear in mind, I'd seen a lot of doctors, all on the fertility side at this point, who repeatedly use that word infertile. It's really terrible when a man in a white jacket says to you as a woman that you're infertile. So I was used to doctors giving me bad news and me giving a bit of pushback. So when the doctor said, well, you've got rheumatoid arthritis and we're going to send you some immune suppressants, I think they started me on Enbrel. We're going to send these syringes to you. But you also have lupus. which I had never heard of. And unfortunately, there's no cure for that. Those are terrible things to hear as a patient because I didn't even know what this was. And I said, are we sure about this? What is it? What does it mean for me? How can there not be a cure? You're the doctor. You must have answers. That's why we come to doctors, because they must have the answers. And she said that unfortunately there was no cure. And I said, but I'm doing my 5th IVF round and I'm using donor eggs. This is really bad timing for me. You need to find an answer. And she looked at me, I think, just with so much incredulity, because she just said, I don't know that doing this round of IVF makes sense. Given your cytokine levels and your tumor necrosis factor alpha levels, you probably have a good 5 years. And
so she's talking about you. She's talking about
me. Yeah, about me, about the finiteness of my life. And I just didn't, do not comprehend, right? It is when we hear something that just does not fit with our picture of the world or how we want our reality to be, we ignore it or try to push it out. And I just said, but wait, what about a false positive? Maybe this test was wrong. Is it possible? And she gave me a very sympathetic look. And I said, can I do it again? And she said, well, of course you can do it again. And I just thought, okay, right, now I've got to go out there and I have to prove that this test was wrong. And I threw the kitchen sink at it. I did yoga. I did Mayan abdominal massage. I did tinctures of echinacea that I made myself. I did the anti-inflammatory zone diet that Barry Sears had made popular back then. I also did a very experimental treatment called intravenous immunoglobulin. And that I did 2 rounds of it. It was around $12,000 for each one. So not cheap. And the idea was that it would bring my immune system back into balance, as opposed to what the other drugs were doing, which was actually suppressing my immune system. So when I looked at these different therapies, I thought immune homeostasis, immune balance, or immune suppression. And I decided I would try this experimental therapy. I'm very, very glad that I did now, because I have calculated that I would have spent now over $1 million on the Enbrel, on the Humira, because it's about $5,000 every single month. And
there's no exit strategy. It's just management of symptoms, right? Yeah.
And you go from, you'll know this better than anyone, you go from one drug, it works for about 18 months, and then the body figures it out and tries to circumvent it. And then you've got to move to a new immunosuppressant. And at the end, you tend to be put on methotrexate, which is a chemo drug. And I've always had this philosophy of bringing things into balance. It could be because I'm half Taiwanese, and just this philosophy of, balancing things, the yin and the yang, and the inner wisdom or the innate wisdom of the body to try to achieve balance as it tries to heal itself. That always appealed to me. And so, as I said, I'm very pleased I did it, because not only did I save money, when I went back to do that test again several months later, the doctor said, negative, your CRP is below 1, your TNF alpha is low, your cytokines have all dropped. And I just said, do you want to know what I did? And she just said, well, I think it was just a blip. And that moment will never leave me, because I realized how much power as a patient, how much power we actually have to allow our bodies to heal. And it also made me realize that had I accepted the diagnosis, And I'm not saying that all diagnoses should be ignored, but had I accepted it, I would have been on this never ending train of immunosuppressant after immunosuppressant. And as you said, there's no exit strategy. So that moment of empowerment was really what put me on my journey towards finding optimum health, not just for myself, but helping others understand that we can't place the burden of our health entirely on the shoulders of our doctors. It's simply not fair. We patients must take an active role. And my hope is that by working hand in hand with our doctors, we will be able to achieve optimum health, right?
Yeah, I love what you're saying here, because this is something that I really want to drill down. This is sort of a message that I have been noodling on, in particular with the pandemic. And we don't have to get into all of that, but I think that the overarching idea here is that no one is responsible for your health but you, not your husband, not your friend, certainly not your doctor. I mean, they can help facilitate, and they can help advocate, and they can help, get you the drugs and or the treatment and or the care that you potentially need. But at the end of the day, it's not them who's responsible for you. It's you who is responsible for you. And that's why I think your story, I wanted to start off with it, because I think it's incredible for, for you to have this diagnosis of lupus, which is an autoimmune disease. Like, it's not just like, yeah, I think you have a cold, it'll be gone in a couple of weeks. Like, this is a death sentence in many cases. And I think for you to be able to come back and say, all right, it's gone. And she's like, well, it must have been a mistake. I mean, part of that is maybe some of the hubris that, we don't need to touch, that sort of lives in the medical establishment. Like, oh, it must have been a mistake because we're never wrong. Or you don't have the necessary tools to sort of approach this, and you have found, I guess through this, this globulin therapy, therapy that you found was certainly, while it, as you mentioned, may have had, some controversy to it, but was very, very beneficial for you in the end. And so how did that lead you to Spermidine? So you're at this place now where you have sort of this clean bill of health, let's say, and I'm using, air quotes, clean bill of health. How do you find Spermidine? How does that come into your line of vision?
Well, I took about 10 years to not just regain my health, but to then get pregnant naturally without any IVF, no IUI, no acupuncture, anything, just completely naturally, and delivered a baby at age 43. And I had adopted a child a few years, 3 years earlier. So I was busy raising these two kids. And it was while I was on the playground collecting them from school that I would have conversations with some of the other parents. And if you live in a place like Oxford, I suppose it's probably like when you live in, Cambridge, Massachusetts or something, or Cambridge, England, the parents in these tiny university towns are doing something interesting. They're translating a new version of the Aeneid, or they're finding a cure to cancer, right? And so I would talk to them about whatever, transcranial electrostimulation or immunology. And I'd say, wow, these are great ideas. It's so interesting what you're doing. Have you thought of starting a company for that? And they'd say, oh, well, I thought about it, but it's a lot of work. How would I raise money? And I just said, I'll do that. I can help. I love being a cheerleader for these new breakthrough therapies. And the more I got involved with the university ecosystem around this, the more I became aware of a group, a small group, in particular, 2 women and their lab, that was working on the immune system, immune senescence, and on spermidine. And the university has its own innovation group. And when I talked to them, they said, we think you'd be really interested in the work of these 2 people. The only thing is that you can't commercialize this because there will never be a patent around this molecule because it's in food. And so commercially, it's not such a great idea because it can't be patented. But this, of course, is a bit like, a red flag to a bull. And I was thinking, is that a true statement? I wonder, wouldn't people be interested in knowing about this and getting this if it could, in fact, reverse the age of the immune system? So I was introduced to Professor Katja Simon, an immunologist here at the University of Oxford, and one of her postdocs, Dr. Ghada Al-Saleh, and looked at their work on how spermidine was potentiating the antibody response in elderly mice who were given vaccines. And thought, wow, this is fascinating. And in fact, Katja had gotten the beginnings of a patent back in 2014, but had let it lapse. And when she let it lapse, that then went into to the universe as prior art. That means that it can't be patented ever again. And as a result, not interesting to any pharmaceutical company. But I thought there's definitely something there, right? And some people believe that if you can reverse age the immune system, you can reverse age the other organs. So I started looking at spermidine, looking at the research, and I could see that it was helpful to lung health in asthmatics. I could see that it was helpful to fertility, that it was helpful for bone health, that it was helpful for heart health. It was good for cognition. It sort of had, that sort of too good to be true, was positive for so many different aspects of human health. But what really got me excited was when I read a paper about the hallmarks of aging. And it listed rapamycin, metformin, lithium, estradiol, even. All of these things that we know are anti-aging molecules, NAD, glucosamine, and it had spermidine. And spermidine was inhibiting, at that time, 5 of the hallmarks of aging. Since then, it has been found to also help with keeping long telomeres, which is a 6th hallmark. And rapamycin was the only other molecule that inhibited as many of those hallmarks, those pathways down which we age. And why it's important is because if we can press on those 9 levers, the idea is we can slow down the aging process. And if we slow down the aging process, we can slow the onset of all those diseases of aging. Cancer. I'd say my autoimmune disease was a symptom of my biological, elderly status in a way. Heart disease, Alzheimer's. These are all illnesses of aging. And so rather than treating those illnesses, why not just slow down the aging process and avoid them for as long as possible? And that's what HealthSpan is about, right? So that's when I decided to commercialize spermidine and began to work with a wonderful group in Japan called the Japan Autophagy Consortium, the patron of which is Yoshinori Osumi, the 2016 Nobel laureate in medicine or physiology. And then one of his colleagues, Tomatsu Yoshimori at the University of Osaka. So it's, we're really looking at all different sources of spermidine that can help trigger, that can help inhibit these hallmarks of aging, but also help with the process of autophagy or cell renewal and recycling. And you and your audience will know that cells are the foundation of the health of our organs and tissues. And so if we can just make those as healthy as possible, the rest of us, everything else will start to fall into place. Because the cells need to be in balance. They need to have cellular homeostasis. And autophagy helps with that. So spermidine really felt like it was the time to bring it out, given the Nobel prize being awarded in 2016. People are just starting to hear about it, and thought it was the perfect time to bring out one that we've lab tested to ensure that the amount of spermidine that it says on the bottle, that's exactly what you get inside. Because you can never tell what's out there. There are very few labs that actually measure the amount of spermidine in these supplements.
Yeah, I think supplements in general can be a bit of the wild, wild west. Like you just don't know what you're getting. And I want to come back to the hallmarks of aging, and I want to really make sure that we do a deep dive in terms of oxidative stress and autophagy and glycation and all of that. But I just think for the audience who's never heard of spermidine, I would love to just define what it is, where it comes from, and where I know that there's three main ways that we can sort of get spermidine: endogenously, exogenously. So let's talk a little bit about where spermidine comes from, and we can talk, if you feel comfortable talking about the metabolic pathway in terms of where, the derivatives in terms of the polyamine flux pathway, we can do that as well. So where does spermidine come from?
Okay, so we manufacture spermidine, as you mentioned, endogenously in our bodies, in our tissues, and in our gut biome. So there are different strains of bacteria in the gut biome that will produce it, just like they can produce neurotransmitters and vitamins, right? And as we get older, we lose the ability to produce it in our tissues, and the gut biome, if it has suffered from, say, an onslaught of broad spectrum antibiotics, the gut biome's ability to manufacture also goes down, which makes the third way that we get it, which is exogenously or from outside of the body, we get it from food. It makes that third source very, very important. So all plants, in spite of the name, in spite of the saucy name, it comes in all plants, all animals, every person you see on the street,
male or female, right?
Male or female,
right.
Male or female, does not matter what your gender is. Everyone manufactures these polyamines. And the big ones that are part of the polyamine recycling loop would be spermidine, spermine, and the beautifully named putrescine. What were they thinking, right? But spermidine is in exceedingly high quantities in human sperm, in semen. And it is also in extremely high quantities in human breast milk. When we are infants, that is the time when we will have the highest concentration of spermidine in our bodies. It enables the body to grow. That's why breast milk is full of spermidine, because we mothers need to help our babies grow. The other thing why it's important there is that it will help downregulate zonulin. Zonulin opens up the tight junctions of the gut lining. And so for that very naive infant gastrointestinal tract, it really needs to have some support in making those tight junctions as tight as possible so the baby can get ready for food. So where it comes from, it's literally all around us. And we're making it all throughout our lives, but in decreasing quantities, just like, we stop producing melatonin in the same amounts. We stop producing
NAD,
progesterone, estrogen. Exactly.
Yeah.
Testosterone, all these wonderful things, right? NAD also, which inhibits a hallmark of aging. All these things we need go down in quantity. The production goes down in quantity as we get older. And that's why topping up in whatever way we can through food, and foods like wheat germ, natto, which is a fermented Japanese soybean dish, from shiitake mushrooms, peas, legumes. They have high quantities, but honestly, any plant will have it. Carnivores, I'm very sorry to say, will not be getting a lot unless they're having chicken liver. I don't know why. It's not beef liver. It's not lamb liver. It's just chicken liver that has high quantities of spermidine. But we need to then get it from outside of the body. And if
I can interrupt you, can I interrupt you for one moment? Just if it's produced in all plants, and this is just like a naming thing, I'm just curious, but why was it named spermidine? Is it because we see the highest concentration in seminal fluid? Like why is it named that?
It was because Antony van Leeuwenhoek, who is the father of modern biology, who, created the first microscope, he was casting about in his studio or his lab for things to put under the microscope to look at, and to sort of imagine a guy, right? I put my hair under there. I put spit under there. What else? Urine. Oh, I know, semen. Let's just put that under there. And so he looked at it and he saw that as it dried, there were crystals on the plate, and he did not know what the crystals were, but he knew where they came from, and so he decided to call those crystals spermine. Later on, when other scientists looked at this, they then kind of kept the same naming convention, and then named the other polyamine identified there spermidine. Mm-hmm. And actually, the polyamines have some terrible names: cadaverine, putrescine. Not nice, and they are essential.
What were they thinking? I agree. Why is it always? Oh goodness. Okay. Well, we won't go there. But male researchers sometimes, funny names. Yeah.
This is why Apple brought in all the women to write the handbooks, right, on how to use the Mac. I think that honestly, we should have been allowed into the lab to name these things.
Right. I remember and just as a funny thing, I remember when the iPad came out, all the women were like, "What? Who named this thing? Like iPad? Come on, guys." Yeah. Another example of like men naming things badly.
Don't remind me of my cycle. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. Like iPad. Great. All right. So let's come back to the hallmarks of aging, because I think this is really, really interesting. And it's, what you said before, I think is really important. It's like this compound that seems to really, it's like too good to be true. It's working on all of these different hallmarks of aging. And I would love to maybe just double click on a few of them. In particular, I'd like to start with autophagy and then oxidative stress. And then we can maybe talk about glycation and some of the misfolded, proteins and cellular senescence. But let's talk a little bit about autophagy, because this word it's become a sort of like a really popular word. Everyone, it's often discussed in the context of fasting, where we say, well, when you are fasting, you upregulate autophagy. Autophagy is happening all the time, but there are things like fasting, like exercise, that can upregulate, that can augment autophagy, the activity of autophagy. We're constantly cleaning our cells. And I believe that spermidine is also one of those compounds, like exercise, like fasting, that can also augment or elevate the level of cell turnover. Is that correct?
Exactly. So it is a fasting mimetic. And if you are someone who is hypothyroid, which I am, I can't fast for very long. It's actually counterproductive for me because it downregulates my metabolism. And as a result, finding something like this is a better alternative for me personally. And in terms of autophagy, I think yes, we've heard a lot about auto and phagy. These are Greek terms for self and eating. And rather than it being actually self-cannibalization, it's more like Pac-Man going and just eating the bad mitochondria, the bad organelles, these things, these components of the cell that need to be disposed of, right? It's like having old tires on your car. You need to replace them. But if you just keep those old tires, the functionality of the car is not going to go anywhere. So autophagy is basically the process of taking your cells into the garage and having, what we call an MOT here in the UK, just getting everything checked out and bringing the cell back to balance, cellular homeostasis. And it can also do something called mitophagy, which is basically the equivalent within the mitochondria. So it can create renewal and repair of the mitochondria. Spermidine also triggers something called virophagy, where it is eating up viruses in the body. And there was even a study in Berlin at one of the hospitals there early on in vitro of the virus that shall not be named and spermidine as well, because spermidine will swarm viruses. And finally, it will also help with fats that will be engulfed or eaten, bad fats in the body. And that's why this can, and it's not definitive, but seems to help with reducing triglycerides. Certainly Nobiletin can do that. When it triggers autophagy, it also triggers lipophagy, and hence why triglycerides have gone down in some individuals who've been taking the other autophagy inducer, Nobiletin. But as a concept, yeah, it is getting to be hot at the moment. And I suppose it's probably important to say that what you mentioned before, the Goldilocks zone, you can do too little autophagy, but you can also do too much. And if you do too much, then you're going to kill off healthy cells. So a few weeks ago, there was a very famous longevity expert who was asked what his supplement stack was. And he said, he took a gram of spermidine. That's 1,000 milligrams. And I had so many people writing to me saying, your product only has 1 milligram, but he takes 1,000 milligrams. And I just wrote, well, then he will probably kill all his cells because that is too much.
Well, there's something to be said about the area under the curve. This is the other thing, right? So when we think about benefit, it's like you can fast too much. You can calorically restrict too much. You can have fat, you can have too much fat. You can it's like everything is relative. So you can, and as you said, there's at the lower end of that bell. If for those of you that remember university and you remember everything was graded on that bell curve, what we're talking about is the area under that bell curve. So underneath, sort of that lower first part of the bell, you're going to get some benefit, but the majority is going to cluster under, if you're talking about university, it's around 65. They're going to give you a 65. Most people get 60 to 65 at university. And then as you ride that curve over the x-axis, as you you're also going to start to see decreasing rate of return on the benefits. So this is, I have this, maybe this is an extreme view, but it's like, I love to look at nuance. Like it's not enough to say you fast. Oh, I do fasting. I do a 16-8 every single day. Maybe that's too much for you. Maybe taking a gram of spermidine, maybe the amount of, cell apoptosis or cell death that's happening is now too aggressive. And now you're negating any of the benefits that gentle cell renewal, can afford. So
yeah, absolutely. It's like Dr. Stephen Gundry you interviewed him maybe a month or so ago, and he was saying fasting 365 days a year. No, fasting one day, good. Fasting every day, not good. Right. It is that nuance. And I do think that there's even more nuance because for women, and some of us are hypothyroid. Fasting is going to be really difficult. Some of us are going through menopause. Fasting for some people, I remember when I was going into ketosis on purpose, going through menopause, because I was training to be a bulletproof coach, I was getting terrible night sweats. So we're each individual. We've got to find what's right for us, but definitely the nuance is very important to take into consideration. And dosing is something I take very, very seriously because the poison is in the dose, right?
Right. The dose makes the poison. So let's talk about the 1 milligram because we mentioned it. And I also want to, you also mentioned Nobiletin. So I don't think we've defined that yet for our listeners. So let's talk about, your product is called Primeadine, which is, play on the word, spermidine. And I would also guess like prime of your life.
Yes, the new prime of life. Yeah.
Right. So Primeadine has 1 milligram of spermidine in it. Why is that the dosing that you chose?
So that's the minimum effective dose in the human trials for cognition. So, Spermidine, although polyamines have been studied for decades, and there are over 13,000 papers on polyamines, in terms of human trials of spermidine, food-derived spermidine, the ones that have been done have been conducted with 1 milligram. The highest dose, and it's still an ongoing study, is 6 milligrams. The European Food Safety Authority has put a cap of 6 milligrams per day for supplemental food-derived spermidine. And so that's why we chose 1 milligram. We knew we were not going to go over that 6 milligram threshold, and we knew that there was evidence of benefit to memory and cognition at that level. So that was really the reason for that choice.
Okay. And let's talk about Nobiletin. You mentioned that. We were talking about that in the pre-chat in terms of being the gluten-free alternative, but maybe just define what Nobiletin is, and then we can start talking a little bit about hair and skin and cardiometabolic and brain. Yeah.
Nobiletin is found in citrus, and in particular on the island, the longevity blue zone island of Okinawa in Japan. The Shikawasa lime is known as the longevity citrus for its use in traditional foods and medicines. It's used in Japanese medicine, that's Kenpo medicine. And it's most likely due to a molecule called Nobiletin, which has been found to really help decrease triglycerides in humans without altering their food intake. So this molecule also triggers autophagy. And that was one of the reasons why we wanted to add it to our spermidine, because we felt there were synergies between it. And the Primeadine gluten-free version, which is called Primeadine GF, has 1.2 milligrams of spermidine. And then it has around 0.35 milligrams of Nobiletin. That is the amount that was used and shown to be the minimum effective dose in a human trial. So we've put those two together to help with triggering autophagy in the body. And we've also added in some turmeric. All of it is sourced from Okinawa. It's all manufactured in an FDA-registered facility in Okinawa. And that is now finally on the market. I'm so glad, because there were so many other individuals, autoimmune patients like me, who said, Leslie, this is a great product, but unfortunately, I cannot do gluten. Or people who were celiac, or people who said, look, I've got, I was on the pill for 10 years. I've got terrible candida and leaky gut. No way can I have gluten, which is what is in the original Primeadine. Just they're 40 milligrams, which is less than 1/100th, 1/150th, or 1/100th of a slice of bread, but it was still enough to affect them. So this product was really brought out to address the needs of those individuals who might be on the autoimmune paleo diet, or on Dr. Gundry's diet, where you can't have lectins. Gluten is probably the most famous lectin out there. And yet you still get the benefits of autophagy. And both spermidine and turmeric are anti-inflammatory. So there was a nice synergy there too.
Wonderful. And I want to talk, as I was mentioning, I want to talk a little bit about what I've noticed on by taking Primeadine for this, I don't know how many months I've been taking it now, maybe 7-8 months now. And we can talk about hair and eyebrows and all that we were talking in the pre-chat. But the one thing I did want to just come back to, because I want to make sure that we cover this, is you were mentioning, just like all these compounds like NAD and estradiol and testosterone, spermidine lowers as we age, our ability in the microbiome, let's say, to synthesize it. If we're not being conscious of where we're getting it exogenously, maybe we're taking it in supplement form as we would with Primeadine, or we're taking it in wheat germ or chicken liver or, natto, pardon me. One of the things that I've heard you talk about, and I would love for you to share it with my listeners here, is and Dave, who's been on the show, Dave Asprey, has talked about this idea for men in particular, that it's a good idea, when we're talking about sexual health, because this is something that is obviously produced in the sperm, for them to abstain from ejaculating as often as they might want, right? But to become aroused, but not necessarily to orgasm. Can you speak to whether or not that might be lending to an increased ability for the male, at least, for our beautiful men who we talk so much about women here, and we're going to talk about perimenopause, I promise. But I wanted to just have a little shout out here for our beautiful men who we also want to take care of as they're aging. Is there a practice, let's say, that we could encourage our men to, maybe become excited, but not necessarily to climax?
Exactly. Well, so I can speak to this partly because when I was running my online matchmaking company in Asia Pacific, I got the moniker of being the high priestess of sex in China from an Italian daily paper, the Corriere della Sera. And I have worked with a physiologist here at the University of Oxford.
You must have that on a T-shirt somewhere, though. You have to.
Wouldn't that be great? High priestess of sex. No, but it is always the question. When you do those icebreakers with large groups of people, and they say something, you tell the person you're talking to one thing that they would never guess about you, and that is always it. Right?
I love it.
So I've worked with Professor Dennis Noble here at the University of Oxford on this exact topic because he was given the opportunity by a former pupil of his, the Empress of Japan, to look at 30 scrolls that were written in 984 by the court physician to the Japanese emperor, and which contained 3 scrolls devoted only to longevity, one of which is only about sexual intimacy and longevity. So Dennis and I looked at this, me having a lot of knowledge of these Eastern practices from having worked with, reproductive groups in China, and him from the role of a physiologist. And we said, is it possible that these ancient Taoist instructions, and bear in mind that Tantra and Taoism, these practices will have had influence on one another, so they're similar. Is it possible that those instructions for the emperor, could they really work? And the instructions are for very slow sex, for touching the meridians through the arms, through the neck. Actually, they're very interesting because they're sort of touching around here. The thymus is right here. Mm-hmm. Is it possible that they're opening up meridians? But of course, there is this issue of the man is getting very aroused, which turns on his internal pharmacy, right? And the pharmacy is saying, oh, well, I'm getting very aroused. I think I'm about to reproduce, and starts manufacturing semen. And it is in that process that there will be a lot of spermidine that will be manufactured. So the body will say, okay, I'm going to take some arginine here. I'm going to take some SAMe, and I'm going to put these together, and I'm going to make spermidine, and I'm going to get it ready to be ejaculated. But then the question is, what if we don't allow that ejaculation? What if the man practices seminal retention? Is it possible for him to benefit from having actually manufactured a lot of spermidine? And what Dennis and I have posited is that indeed it will benefit the man, because all of the spermidine will still be able to circulate within the body if you were practicing the proper way. And actually, Dennis just wrote a paper that was published in an Australian journal called Eon that you might want to link to, which was called Slow Sex, Long Life. And that goes into all of this. And of course, it's not just spermidine that is produced in this, but oxytocin is increased. And we know from the work of Elizabeth Blackburn and Elizabeth Epple at UC San Francisco that couples that have intercourse, even if they say that their relationship is not good, they have longer telomeres. And is it because the woman is getting spermidine from the man? And is it because the man is also manufacturing more? That we don't know, but we know that there is this anomaly that you can take groups of couples, some that say, yeah, happily married, we love each other, we have not had sex in decades. And you have other couples that say, don't really like them very much, but we do have regular sex. And the ones that don't really like each other but have regular sex will actually be healthier. So really fascinating, that whole thing. So we do believe that there is credence to it. And it's, again, unlocking the mysteries of the body's internal pharmacopoeia. Just like the gut biome produces these vitamins and hormones and neurotransmitters and polyamines like spermidine, what else is being produced in our tissues like spermidine?
Right. And then for the women, so, I led in with the men, but I had a sort of a selfish question that is going to come on the tail of it. So let's say you have, a relationship with your male, whether you like him or not, that's a different podcast. It's a different subject. But let's say you've decided that this time there will be no seminal retention. So maybe you've been practicing and arousal, but he hasn't climaxed, and maybe she has, because we know that for men and women, it's like, for women, it's like as many as you can get, right? As many orgasms as you can get in terms of like balancing hormones and all of that. But let's say this time, as a couple, there's going to be ejaculate, like the man is going to climax. Yeah. Is there a benefit? How shall I say this without sounding crass? Is there a benefit whether it's received vaginally or orally? Is there a difference between the two? Do we know anything of that sort?
Well, so vaginal mucosa and oral mucosa are very similar, as you know. And whether or not, if it's absorbed through the vagina, there is at least one study which shows that women who enjoy sex and their husbands ejaculate into the vagina, it does seem to help with the health of the vagina. And if you were to ingest through the oral mucosa, of course, then it would go into the intestinal lumen. And spermidine is very, very bioavailable in the lumen. I mean, it's one of the reasons why we didn't bother to make a liposomal version of this, because it's just so very bioavailable. You wouldn't need to. And I think that either way it's probably going to get into the body. And there will be, I'm guessing, a holistic benefit, whichever way you do it. Vaginally does seem to help women with vaginal health, though. I'll have to find that study again. But I remember coming across it a long time ago and thinking, oh, this is interesting, but I probably can't talk about it on a podcast.
Yes, except this one.
Except this one. Yeah.
Exactly.
Except for Stephanie. Yeah.
Because Stephanie wants to know. Because I'm thinking like there's acidic environments either side, right? So like when the spermidine reaches the stomach, of course, that's a highly acidic environment. And then of course the vagina, if, depending on where a woman is in her cycle, assuming that she's still in her reproductive years, can also be a very hostile environment as well for sperm. And we know this. So I was just wondering if there's a difference in terms of maybe the survival rate of the spermidine in particular, whether it was like orally received or vaginally.
Well, interesting about the acid environment comment. So we know that spermidine seems to help with hydrogen peroxide. I'm sure I've read that somewhere. I'm just sort of thinking where I have seen that. I mean, I know glutathione, catalase, superoxide dismutase help as well, but I'm sure I've seen that spermidine helps with this. And one of the reasons that it is produced in great quantities in semen is because producing semen is a very oxidative event for men. There is a lot of reactive oxygen species in producing sperm. And so you need a lot of spermidine for protection. So it would not surprise me, though, don't quote me on this, it would not surprise me if it can survive in an acidic environment, if it can deal with hydrogen peroxide and it can deal with a lot of ROS. I think it has certainly a better chance than a lot of other things to survive.
Yeah. And that, that's part of the reason why I don't really love probiotics, because it's like, well, you take them, and unless if they're sort of packaged in a certain way, they're sort of going to be dead on arrival, right? Because the acidic environment of the stomach is such that, if you have any viable probiotics in the product to begin with, once it reaches the HCl in the stomach, that it's sort of DOA.
Yeah. And that's why we also put a prebiotic in our product, because we thought there is a strain of bacteria that you can introduce to produce it in your gut. But then it was like, what's the delivery mechanism? How will we get it there into the gut intact? So we just decided, well, let's add a prebiotic, because that will selectively feed the strains that want that fructooligosaccharide, and then they will be stronger and we're able to produce spermidine in the gut biome.
One of the things that I've noticed in the several months that I've been taking it is, and I was saying this to you, actually, when I first reached out to you around the product itself, was that my hair was starting to go from gray back to, we'll call this midnight brown. I don't know what color you would call it. It's like dark brown, black. It's not quite black, but it's, very, very dark brown. And I've noticed that, and I actually should take I'll try to see if I can take a photo of my hair, because you sort of you can't really see it now, but there's like areas that I still have some grays, but there's like areas that are kind of around here that they have like the white, and then just beyond it, or just ahead of it, is brown again. So it was gray, and then now it's back to its original color. And I wanted to touch on the different cycles of the hair, because we have, the anagen phase, the catagen phase, telogen, exogen, and how spermidine might be affecting the color of the hair, and also potentially the full, like I was saying to you in the pre-chat, my eyebrows. They're already naturally relatively full, just being of, Middle Eastern, Mediterranean descent. But, with age, they thin out. Like I got an eyebrow pencil like anybody does, right? But not really needing to use it in the past 8 or 9 months or so since starting it. So I wanted to see if you might be able to comment on hair growth on the head in particular, because a lot of women, particularly in their 30s and 40s and 50s, start to notice hair thinning out. Women with PCOS will start to notice like the temples thinning out as well. And then eyelashes, eyebrows, hair.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah. So you mentioned the anagen or the growth phase, and that is really what we want our hair to be in as much as possible. So when we're young, it's in the anagen phase quite a lot. I look at my 17-year-old daughter with her glossy dark hair, and she could put it into a ponytail, it's swishing and so full. And I always think, wow, look at that. And what that is her hair is an anagen all the time, right? As we get older, we then start to find that our hair goes into catagen, resting phase, or telogen effluvium stage, where it's ready to shed. It is only in the anagen or growth phase of the hair life cycle that melanogenesis happens. So if you want melanin or pigment, the follicle has got to be in the growth phase. And one of the things that spermidine does is it will, when human hair follicles are in the presence of spermidine, they will go into the anagen phase. 26% more hair follicles will go into the anagen phase than, say, 6 days prior. So over the course of 6 days, all of a sudden, you have a huge amount more hair that is going into the growth phase than before, which is a very, very big deal. And it is during that time that spermidine can also modulate the human epithelial stem cell in the hair follicle. So we've talked about, those hallmarks of aging, and one of those hallmarks is stem cell dysfunction. If you have stem cell dysfunction systemically, it's also going to hit your hair. And those epithelial stem cells in the hair follicle if they're dysfunctional, you're going to get those frizzy hairs, those unpigmented hairs, and they might even get thinner. or maybe just coarser, but it does change. The texture definitely changes. So what
those gray hairs are squiggly. Like those the gray hairs that I have, they're different than the regular hair that I have. Yeah.
They're different. And every woman tells me this. And I've had them too. But what is actually interesting is some people will say they take the product and they say, well, I still have my gray hair. And I'll say, but how many of the squiggly hairs do you have? And they'll say, oh, actually, no, you're right. They're straighter. Like if I look, it's straight at the root and it is squiggly at the bottom. Right. That is actually progress, because already there, the texture is changing. The other thing that tends to happen, because spermidine, and our product in particular, we've tested for this, it increases the keratin production. So we've had women write to us and say, oh, it's so great. I've been on this for 12 months and I don't have to do my keratin treatments anymore. And I always think, I didn't even know what a keratin treatment was.
I was going to ask, what is that?
I think it's a Japanese treatment where they put keratin on the hair and they heat the hair such that it makes the hair smoother and shinier. So, we all know when we look at young people, we see the texture and the glossiness of the hair. And it does, it has a very particular look to it, right? And keratin is supposed to do that. So it gives this youthening effect to the hair, which then naturally gives a youthening halo effect to the rest of the body, right? So spermidine will increase keratin, the epithelial stem cells in the hair bulge, the melanin production there. And what I will say is that if a woman has an underlying issue, you mentioned PCOS, and a lot of, I'm just thinking, I might not have this right, but I'm thinking that those with PCOS might tend to get more male pattern baldness. And I think some of that is due to high 5-alpha reductase.
Yes.
Yeah, so yes. Exactly. They're converting testosterone to dihydrotestosterone.
Correct.
And those women, I would say, if you've got that, your root cause is really that high 5-alpha reductase enzyme activity, and spermidine is not going to inhibit that. Then I would say those women need melatonin because that will inhibit it. Or they might try saw palmetto, but I actually like melatonin better. Women who have thyroid issues, which I'm a hypothyroid patient. If you're hypothyroid, you're going to get really thinning hair. I have seen women with bald spots on their head in their 40s. You will go prematurely gray. And this is not going to reverse a hypothyroid condition. So those would be my caveats. If you've got androgenetic alopecia or that male pattern baldness, or you've got hair thinning due to thyroid issues, that we can't help with, but we can help with all the other types of hair loss.
Well, this is where you might consider, what you're talking about is really root cause medicine, right? So how can we, if you have somebody who is, hyper, has a state of increased dihydrotestosterone, which is what sort of is quite fatal to the hair follicle. A lot of times, and we've done other podcasts on this, so I can certainly link this in the show notes, but a lot of times with PCOS, one of the issues is it has its roots in hyperinsulinemia. There's too much insulin, there's too much blood glucose. So there can be nutritional and lifestyle modifications, such as lifting weights to help with improving insulin resistance, et cetera, that can help with that. And then thyroid, would be the same. We want to be thinking about how we can be improving conversion peripherally, like in the liver, in the gut, in the skeletal muscle in the heart, et cetera, from T4 to T3. And there's lots of practitioners that can help with that. So obviously when we're talking about spermidine, it's not like the miracle. There's no claims here around being able to cure any disease. What we're talking about is just amplifying and optimizing normal cellular function. Exactly. Let's talk about sleep, because I wear a Whoop. And so what the Whoop tells me is that my deep sleep has improved. And so I'm easily getting, north of 2 hours of deep sleep each night. Again, in the same way that nothing really has changed in my, I lift weights fairly regularly. It's like somewhere between 4 and 5 days a week. I walk on my treadmill. Like I'm actually standing on my treadmill now. It's not going, but just for, audio purposes, it'd be too loud. But, I walk, I eat a relatively clean diet. I cycle my carbs, all the things. But my deep sleep has improved, and my HRV, my heart rate variability. So I wondered if you can comment on any data that might suggest an improvement, especially in that first half of sleep, like that 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. kind of window. Like I'm all deep. Like a lot of times in the past, I might kind of come out of it or wake up, but that's not really happening anymore for me. So I wondered if you had any comments on, its effect on the circadian rhythm or anything like that. Yeah.
So what's interesting, I will say we need human studies on spermidine and sleep. There is one study that is being conducted right now, which will sleep is not the main focus, but sleep is a metric that they're looking at. So I hope we'll get that data soon. What we have so many clients who report that their deep sleep has increased. I was talking to a yoga instructor in New York City, Alina Brower, who said, I'm getting 30 to 60 minutes more deep sleep every night, which is quite incredible. And the mouse studies and the in vitro studies that have been done, so in vitro being in a petri dish, show that this helps with circadian reset. So as with elderly humans, elderly mice have very erratic sleep-wake patterns. They tend to be awake for longer and have a shorter window of sleep. And that's what many of us witness with our own relatives, our older relatives who've got a radio on or a light on at night. And this is absolutely terrible for brain health because it is only in that sort of 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. window when deep sleep happens that the glymphatic system comes into action, where the different compartments of the brain shrink and these channels of cerebrospinal fluid take out waste, and then it's positive that nutrients are brought back in. And what we can see in the mouse studies is that resetting happens after they have been administered spermidine. And we know that there is something called the clock gene, which is deep in the pineal gland. And there are soldiers, for instance, who have had terrible battle injuries where they lose the photoreceptors in their eyes, which actually speak to the pineal gland and say, now there's sunlight, produce cortisol, wake up. Now it's daylight, produce melatonin, go to sleep. In those individuals, their clock gene is really dysregulated and their sleep and wake patterns are all over the place. In vitro, at least, those clock genes appear to be impacted by spermidine, and there appears to be communication such that spermidine can actually help those clock genes regulate better. All of this, none of it is in humans. Therefore, we can't speak definitively about it. We need more studies. Certainly, clinically, we have doctors such as yourself, we have nutritionists, we have coaches, and we have clients all coming to us saying, this seems to be very helpful for sleep. It's not in everybody. That's what's very interesting. But it is in a statistically significant percentage of clients that, we can say seems to work, worth a try. I will, again, caveat like I did with hair growth and thyroid and androgenetic alopecia, that there are people who take Primeadine at night and say, it keeps me awake. And I can't explain that. They then tend to take it in the morning, and that seems to help with energy. I don't pretend to understand why it's like that. But it should positively impact that sleep-wake cycle anyway, even if you take it in the morning.
And then for the women who are in their 40s, it typically happens like sort of early in their 40s where they sort of have this persistent brain fog. Like, why did I walk into this room again? Like, where's my phone? And when I think about Spermidine as a whole, the way that I am viewing it is a way to, as you mentioned with the mitophagy and the autophagy and working on reducing oxidative stress, it's a way to reduce systemic inflammation. Perhaps as we age, the body is forming more free radicals, more inflammatory agents faster than they can get rid of them. In the same way that if as we age, if you're not doing anything about it, you'll have more bone resorption than you will have bone growth. You will have more muscle wasting than you will have hypertrophy of the muscle. I wonder if there is, and I wonder if you can speak to, the effects that it may have. So we've been talking a little bit about sleep. Certainly that's effects on the brain. And as you're talking, I'm like, I wonder if there's like the melanocyte stimulating hormone. I wonder if there's like a key, because we talked about hair and, having the melanocytes and the melanin active in that anagen phase. And of course, melanocyte stimulating hormone being released from that central master clock in exposure to light. I wonder if there's something there. But could you speak to general brain health, for the woman who's listening, who may be, 45, let's say, and she's like, I just don't know where the hell my phone is like 80% of the time. And, I can't think, like there's just this cloud, this persistent fog that I seem to be in.
Okay. So I'm putting my health coach hat on here. And I would say that I would look very carefully. Well, Spermidine is supportive. I would first and foremost get hormone panels done, and I would get thyroid checked. Most men and women, as we age, thyroid hormone declines. And I find that really helps with relieving brain fog, but hormones do too. Hormone replacement therapy. If I was lucky enough to be in conversation with Dr. Dale Bredesen several months ago. He was doing a presentation to the Oxford Longevity Project, and he was saying, off screen, that hormone replacement therapy is so protective for women. If we want to avoid dementia and Alzheimer's, it is one of his biggest things.
I totally agree.
And that's where I am. I really, personally, those two, get your thyroid figured out and get your hormones fixed. Those are my two biggest recommendations. Spermidine appears to help. Again, it's systemic, but it is not going to replace your estrogen, testosterone, your progesterone. It's not going to do that. It's not going to convert your T4 to T3. And these are things, they're so big that they really need a specialist such as yourself to work hand in hand with a client and get those sorted first. That said, there have been studies on Spermidine and cognition and memory. Again, the minimum effective dose was 1 milligram. And they actually did a study with bread rolls with Spermidine. And I think the amount was around 2 milligrams, maybe 2 to 3 milligrams. And it took place in an Alzheimer's home. So these were patients who have been diagnosed with Alzheimer's. They have been placed in a special home. And this was put into their food supply. And they used metrics to score their cognition. And it was shown to improve after 3 months of administration of the Spermidine in the bread rolls. So it seems to help. Still, I'm going to say my biggest recommendation, HRT and thyroid.
Yeah. And I appreciate your conservative comments here, because I hold the same views. I think that supplements should be a supplement, as the name suggests, to an already dialed in nutrition protocol, hormone protocol, lifestyle protocol, stress management, sleep, hygiene, etc. So when we're talking about this, certainly what I don't want the listener to take away is like, this is going to be my fix. Everything is going to be fixed here. But we're talking about how we can augment an already dialed in routine. Yeah, exactly.
And sleep, of course, as I mentioned, if you can improve your sleep, as you age and you get that deep sleep, that lymphatic system is going to work well. You will be able to bring the toxins out of the brain. And that is very important to avoid, dementia and Alzheimer's.
So what are you currently researching right now at Oxford? What are some of the things that are really exciting you right now?
Well, I've been looking at fertility because I think that is really interesting. There is existing research on fertility, how spermidine and polyamines are needed for producing eggs, and how supplementation seems to be able to help a woman with her female germline stem cells as she gets older. I think that especially for a former IVF donor egg patient like myself, looking at the possibility of extending fertility, of getting more eggs even after those older ages when the doctors say, sorry, you're infertile, you can only use donor eggs. This is quite exciting. And polyamines are also important for things like implantation, for making the uterine lining, more just sort of conducive to receiving the embryo, also for the embryo to grow. And very important also for men with spermatogenesis. And we know that men who are infertile have much lower levels of spermine and spermidine. So this is quite fascinating to me personally. In terms of specific research at Oxford, it's really, again, more around elderly immunity and immune senescence. And Gada Al-Saleh, who trained as a pharmacist and is now running these trials at Oxford, has been able to show in mice and also in the Petri dish with elderly immune cells that she can rejuvenate them with spermidine. That is very, very exciting. One of the hallmarks of aging is senescent cells. And we can't say that spermidine helps with that, but it definitely helps with senescent immune cells. And that's quite exciting research. So she'll probably be publishing, I don't know, probably certainly in this next year.
That's incredible. And we will put in the show notes the information for people who are looking to find more about your product, Primeadine. This is something, I'm very much a supplement minimalist. Like, I don't take tons of supplements. I think that we want to be, as we've been saying sort of throughout this whole conversation, like, you really do have to have your nutrition and your fitness and in stress management really dialed in. So I like to take a few key supplements to augment everything that I'm already doing. But spermidine is one of those compounds that I am really excited about. And I've been taking Primeadine, your product, now for it has to be at least 8 months, maybe more. I feel like 8-9 months, something like that. And really have noticed, particularly with my hair, it's the hair that I've really noticed, like the fullness, the shininess, the gray hairs, and then my eyebrows as well. And the sleep, as we've been talking about. So I'll make sure that we put the link for people to find out more about Primeadine in the show notes. And I believe we have a 10% code for a discount, which I'll make sure that we include in there as well. Leslie, it's been wonderful chatting with you. I always learn something new. I'm really excited about the research that you and your team are doing up at Oxford. So thank you, and keep up the good fight.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
If you enjoyed that conversation and you want to learn more about hormones, check out this video right here.
Oxytocin is the opposite. It's the most alkalinizing hormone. So in fact, you can have a night out eating pretty crappy, but you've been partying with your friends, laughing, had great sex, and you wake up and your urine pH is completely alkaline. That's the power of oxytocin.